Executive Director of the Center for Community Media at the CUNY's Newmark J School. This forum is part of our signature Newsmaker series, on the record conversations between public officials, civic leaders, and community media journalists. The New York community media is an essential component of the local media ecosystem in New York. More than 300 news organizations serving neighborhoods of mostly immigrant communities and communities of color in 36 languages other than English. Before I pass the mic on to Jarrett Murphy, Executive Editor of City Limits and our moderator today, I would like to thank Eric Adams, Kathryn Garcia, who's going to join us soon, Scott Stringer, and Loree Sutton for joining us today, and to all of the community media journalists attending. Please, for the attendees, use the chat box to offer your comments, to ask questions to the candidates. The conversation will be recorded, and we will share the recording with you after the forum ends. And the last message from me is that in the coming months, we will be holding 6 more conversations with the rest of the candidates in this race. So please stay tuned for upcoming communications on dates and times. And now the floor is yours, Jarrett.
Thanks very much, Graciela. Welcome everybody to this forum. New York City suffers from many things these days. One thing it does not suffer from is a lack of mayoral forums. I think the candidates who are online will tell you this is one of several going on today, many this week. But I think this one is really unique and special, and certainly not because I'm here, perhaps not even because the candidates are here, although they are each special in their own way. It's because of the audience, people who work every day in covering the news of this great diverse city in all its languages and colors and neighborhoods. And they are the people who very much will power this forum. They will be asking the questions beyond a few that I have in my back pocket. I'll be passing on their questions. We are going again with 4 minutes each. We'll proceed by alphabetical order and first name, although we will let Kathryn Garcia go at the end because she is arriving late. Then we will have rounds of questions in which candidates will get 2 minutes to answer each question. And if there's any need for rebuttal, we'll allot time for that. And we'll go to around 3 o'clock, although I know a few candidates may need to drop off early. Without further ado, let me introduce the excellent candidates we have on our Zoom today. Eric Adams is a retired NYPD captain and former state senator who is now the borough president of Brooklyn. Loree Sutton is a retired brigadier general in the U.S. Army who is the city's first commissioner of veteran affairs. Scott Stringer, a former state assemblyman and Manhattan borough president, has since 2014 been New York City's comptroller. And Kathryn Garcia, soon to join us, is the former New York City sanitation commissioner and former pandemic food czar. So with that, we'll go to opening statements. Borough President Adams, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for hosting this. Throughout the last few months, particularly around COVID, I've talked about the importance of viewing our city not as an English-speaking city only. And the mayor today, he acknowledged the failure on the state level of distributing the vaccines, how you were not allowed to fill out the forms if you weren't unable to speak English, and subsequently you did not get the vaccine for the most part. And that is really the story of this city. And I hope during this conversation, and I'm going to say throughout this entire campaign, New York, our city is dysfunctional. And that dysfunctionality is rooted in the inefficiencies of our agencies. Cities are made up of agencies. And if they're not aligned, then the dysfunctionality of it will cascade throughout the entire city. We are inefficient, and those inefficiencies leads to inequalities and in some cases injustices. I'm going to show how, as a city, we can use taxpayers' dollars to run an efficient city. If you just look at the Department of Education and the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, it highlights the inefficiencies. One agency is spending millions of dollars to fight childhood obesity, childhood diabetes, childhood asthma, yet every day the other agency, the Department of Education, feeds our children 960,000 meals a day, and those meals cause childhood obesity, childhood diabetes, childhood asthma. Or the failure of our educational system to educate feeds our criminal justice crisis. 80% of the men and women at Rikers Island don't have a high school diploma or an equivalency diploma. A third of the 18 to 21-year-olds read below a 5th grade reading level, and potentially 30% are dyslexic. 55% have a learning disability. If you don't educate, you incarcerate. Every year, Black and brown students, over 60%, fail to reach proficiency, even with a $27 billion budget. Agency after agency, our inability to allow those who are non-English speakers to navigate the challenges of government and receive the basic services from healthcare to employment information to access to government. That is why I fought hard to ensure that those who are legal residents can have the right to vote, so you can elect people who are local and understand the needs of your community. And there's nothing special about me. I say it over and over again. No one has to tell me what it's like to be a person with low wages. I worked in the kitchen as a dishwasher as a young man. No one has to tell me the challenge of housing security and insecurity. I went to school carrying a garbage bag full of clothing, afraid we were going to lose our home as a child, or having to work hard in the mailroom at a CPA firm to pay my way through college. Or no one has to tell me about police abuse. I was beat by police officers, but didn't say, woe is me. I said, why not me? And went into the police department and fought for reform. I understand New Yorkers, and New Yorkers understand me. It's time for an everyday blue collar person to lead our city. It's not just common dollars and cents, it's common sense. And that's what I'm going to bring. The right team, the right leadership, bring our city in the right direction for all New Yorkers. Thank you very much for hosting this event.
Thank you, Mr. Borough President. Just a reminder to our attendees, I'll be monitoring the chat box for questions to pass on to our candidates, so please feel free to add your questions there. And since I see that she has joined the call, I apologize for not mentioning that earlier. Let's go for opening statement. 4 minutes now to Commissioner Garcia. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for having me and for your patience with me getting on a little bit late. I'm thrilled to be here and thrilled to be able to talk to you a little bit about why I'm running for mayor. I have served this city for the last 14 years. I know what it's like to get a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning, surprisingly, a lot of the time. But whether or not that was delivering water, ensuring the harbor stayed clean, plowing snow, picking up garbage, or delivering food during COVID, I have been there for New York City residents, and I will continue to do that when I am mayor of the city of New York. We need to have a vision going forward that makes sure that we are bringing back our economy, but bringing it back better than it was before. That we are ensuring that all of the wonderful jobs that go along with our arts and our culture and our restaurants that are the beating heart of the city of New York actually open effectively, and that we are supporting those restaurants in particular. My sister owns a restaurant in Brooklyn and struggled until November to keep it open and to keep people employed. But at a certain point, with only outdoor dining, she just couldn't manage it. Her hope is to make it till spring when she can reopen again and be able to just pay her utility bills as we move forward. We know that small businesses are struggling across the city, and they are key to how we get people employed again. But we need to ensure that all of our kids are prepared for the 21st century economy, that they have the skills to go out into either the world of finance or fashion or food, that they can fulfill their dreams. That is why I have a robust education plan that starts with little children, the toddlers, and ends with a career path out of CUNY or out of our trade schools, because there are good middle-class jobs across the city. But I was born and raised in Brooklyn. I was one of 5, and my children were able to lead a middle-class life in this city. It is so hard now. And I take it through the vision of how did they do it, and how can we ensure that every family can have that opportunity moving forward. But there are big challenges ahead. We have to be prepared for climate change. We have to make our city more resilient. And I know that we can do that and make smart investments as we move forward. I've been on the front lines for you for the last 14 years. I know your neighborhoods. I've been out there, and I want to be your next mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll go to General Sutton. 4-minute opening statement, please.
Thanks so much, Jarrett, and thank you so much for this invitation. It's an honor to join fellow candidates as well as all of the folks who are in attendance. I'm Loree Sutton, and I'm running for mayor to bring leadership, sanity, and common sense to the city I love. You know, the first 30 years of my career I was privileged to serve in uniform as a psychiatrist, a public health doctor, as well as a combat veteran and a White House fellow. I've led large, complex organizations during times of crisis and when our troops are in harm's way. And I've innovated and designed the Defense Centers of Excellence for Psychological Health and Traumatic Brain Injury, bringing that experience here to New York, where for the last 5 years, I was so privileged to serve as the founding commissioner for the Department of Veteran Services. We made history, first city in the country to stand up a municipal agency. And through that small agency, we were able to really form an incubator, a laboratory where we could take on the toughest challenges facing this city, like homelessness. And by setting up what works for veterans and their families, you're then in a position to be able to scale and apply those innovations for the greater good. As I look at the challenges that face us now, it's no question the next mayor is going to have to come out of the gates knowing how to deal with the budget and the fiscal crises that we have on our front door, and that will only become more complex over time. Critically, as my colleagues have talked about, it's so critical to be able to open small businesses, to be able to save the restaurants, the ma and pa, boutiques, the cultural institutions, Broadway, all of the things that make New York City, New York. But what has to happen first and foremost is we have to build a foundation of public safety. As mayor, I would absolutely stand up a public safety coordination council. I think for too long, NYPD has sort of shouldered a lot of the load for public safety, but in fact, numerous other city agencies have a skin in the game, including sanitation and fire and parks and emergency management and education and transportation, but to be able to form a coordination council that on a quarterly basis then would bring in community stakeholders, but would also be able to place accountability where it belongs, develop systems to be able to spot patterns as well as to divert resources. This is absolutely essential to earn back the confidence of our fellow New Yorkers who currently are not liking what they see and hear in terms of the headlines and the surges in violent crime as well as murders in our city. We have to establish this public safety foundation. And we also have to be able to invest in our public health system so that we're never in this place again. As a doctor, as a general, as a commissioner, I bring a lot to the table, and I would be honored to serve as your mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Comptroller Stringer.
Well, thank you, Jarrett, and it's good to be with everybody once again. Look, we need a serious manager who knows government and can address the three crises we are facing at the same time in this city. We have a public health crisis, we have an economic crisis, and we have a social justice crisis. And as Comptroller, and before that as Manhattan Borough President, I have run some of the most professional and effective government offices in the city, and that's exactly what I'm going to do at City Hall. Look, when you look at financial experience, think about where the city is today. Before COVID, we had a 3.4% unemployment rate. Over 10 years, we acquired 970,000 new jobs. And the economy was strong. There was more work to do, but we had a base. When the COVID hit, we lost 900,000 of those 970,000 jobs, and the unemployment rate went from 3.4% to 20%, and communities of color, it was much higher. And I believe that in order to bring this city back, we're going to have to manage the hell out of the city, but we're also going to have an understanding about how we bring each sector and each neighborhood back. Our health crisis was laid bare by COVID. My mom passed away in a Bronx hospital. And for the doctors in that Bronx hospital, they said this is not just a crisis for older people with pre-existing health conditions. Too many people of color died, Black people, Latino people who were in their 40s and 50s. And the reason they died is because the city never invested in curing the health disparities in our city. The next mayor's got to change that. We can no longer manage people's health illnesses. We have to change people's health outcomes. And that's exactly what I'm going to do as mayor. I have felt this personally. And we do have a social justice crisis. And we have to build a coalition who knows every neighborhood, who can bring people together and address the crisis laid bare over the last years. I believe very much that my campaign is about fighting for the future, a future economic, environmental, and racial justice city for all New Yorkers. I have a 25-point plan to bring back our small businesses. I'm the first controller to divest from fossil fuel, $4 billion just this week, which means I'm going to make sure we have safe environmental communities throughout our 5 boroughs. We can't just have a resiliency plan for downtown lower Manhattan. We have to have a 5-borough Main Street plan for the entire city. And finally, I just want to say that so much of the future is rooted in our children. As a parent of a 3rd grader and 2nd grader going through COVID, I know the challenges firsthand, but I also know that I'm a privileged parent. I have resources. I can get my kids the help they need. But so many parents who are living in public housing, parents who have kids in homeless shelters with no remote learning device, with no internet access, this is discrimination at its worst. And as mayor, I'm going to fight every day for the children, the kids in those shelters, kids who are falling farther behind. We need a new approach to mental health illness, and we need to invest more in the children of our city. Look, I'm a person who believes very strongly in New York. I grew up in Washington Heights. I remember this city from its darkest days to its best moments. And as mayor, I promise everyone on this call that I will represent every neighborhood and every zip code to bring this city back bigger and stronger than ever. We cannot open this economy the same way we closed it. And that means we're going to need a better budget, better investment, and a leader who understands and has the skills to pay the bills in this town. And that's why I'm running for mayor.
Thank you. So I came with some questions prepared, but I've been inundated by excellent ones in the chat. So we're going to start there. And it's actually a 2-part question. We'll go to Commissioner Garcia first and then down through the same order we just used. One question is, or one part of the question is, what will be your decision about New York City's 8 specialized high schools if you are elected mayor? And the second part from another questioner is, none of us on the call are educators. We have a former police officer, we have a psychologist, many diverse backgrounds. None of us is actually an educator. How do you inform your thinking about education policy? Where will you get your ideas from, and how will you make your decisions about choices like the SAT? Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you for that question. So I want to stop talking about scarcity of seats and start expanding the number of high school options. And I have proposed that we open new high schools across the city and that we use a screen of their grade point average. Not standardized test for the kids who have been working hard to study for them. And in terms of how I'm developing my educational policy, I've been talking to experts, as I'm sure all of my fellow candidates have, but I've also been informed with direct conversations with my sister, who's a special ed teacher in the public schools, as well as with principals across the system, because I believe that it is the principal and teachers that have to be empowered. And I have watched as literally they are finding out on Twitter whether or not they have to go into the building the next day, finding out whether their closures from social media is insane. And I have another sister who today or yesterday was trying to get their daughter through the middle school computer system. She's the one who owns a restaurant. She made it through the PPP loan program with the feds, which was no easy feat, but has so far not been able to get through the middle school process for her daughter and be able to do the applications. That's insane. But I am getting a lot of information, really research papers from folks across the educational sector and direct conversations with the people on the front lines who really do make or break a kid's educational experience.
Thank you. General Sutton.
Thank you. It's an important question. I think that the next mayor is charged with the futures, with the education, with the success, the service, the citizenship of over 1.1 million of our youngest New Yorkers. And I would agree with what Kathryn has talked about in terms of the importance of maintaining the admissions test, as well as expanding the opportunities for high school excellence. I think that the gifted and talent programs need to be equitably distributed throughout the city. I think that rather than there being a single citywide eligibility criteria, that needs to be adapted for a given district, a given school, a given community. I also think that the Regents exam would be a better admissions exam for the high schools because it's actually based upon what is taught in the classroom. But I think we need to go beyond that. I think that schools are such a resource, and what this administration has started with about 30 conversions from schools to community centers, I think the next mayor should continue to be able to develop in the most underserved neighborhoods, to develop the resources, year-round programming, truly a welcoming, inviting community center where the private sector can get involved and adopt a school, where we can have pathways to trades, to careers, to all kinds of experiences that are uniquely available here in New York City. I think for too long, we have not viewed our children as being the absolute gem of our city that they are. It's time to invest in their full potential. And I think the next mayor will have a, not just an opportunity to do that, but it's a moral imperative.
Comptroller Stringer.
During my government service, I've had the opportunity to serve on the Assembly's Education Committee, addressing many of the challenging issues at state level. As Borough President, I work with community education councils and parents to make sure the resources got to the schools that I was supporting. And as Comptroller, I've audited and investigated the bureaucracy at the Department of Education, identified missing computers and hundreds of millions of dollars that should have been in our classrooms, but actually was being used to simply support an endless bureaucracy. And so I have done the research and have the knowledge about how we can smash the bureaucracy and change the paradigm for our kids. But the biggest experience I've had has actually happened to me late in life. I got married a little late, and now I have a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old, a 3rd grader and a 2nd grader in public school. And every day I interact with their teachers and with the people in the schools, the professionals, the principals. And it is a system that is guided by where your school is and the zip codes that your kids live in. And I'm aware of that for my own kids. And we need a mayor who's actually on the ground, talking to teachers, talking to parents, and that's what I've done. You know, I was moving around Brooklyn many months ago, and I was out on a Saturday night, and I was talking to a very well-respected bishop in Brooklyn, and he said to me, I want to introduce you to a parent who wants you to come see the school with no walls. And I thought it was a fancy school with no walls, probably some very progressive learning program. And part of me was like, I'll get to it when I get to it. And then the bishop said to me, no, you have to see this school. They want you to come out. And I went to the school a few days later, and literally in the heart of Brooklyn, where mostly homeless students go, it was the school with no walls. They had no electricity that was really working, dim lights, a broken recess room, and there were no walls in any of the classrooms. This is the story for so many parents in underserved communities. And I want to be the mayor that makes a difference for the kids who do not have those resources. And one of the ways to do it is to take on the tough fights. And I do believe that the specialized high schools, they serve a great purpose. And I honor the parents who are trying to get their kids into schools, but we cannot continue to keep a test that Black and brown kids can't access. And so for step 1, I would change that test and take the 7th grade assessment test, which is more about what you learn in the classroom. It's proven that more kids of color would be able to get into the specialized schools. I do think we should end geographic streams for our high schools. So again, more parents of color and other kids can enjoy some of the best schools in the city. I do think we have to make sure that kids have accelerated programs but we also have to worry and make sure that the kids who are going to be even more behind because of this pandemic also get help and get the mental health resources they need. Public education is the highest priority for a mayor. I see as my kids develop that we want every kid to have the same opportunity, more after school, more robotics, more chess, more sports. Let's give everything we have to the great diverse kids of this city and make education the greatest priority in a post-pandemic city.
Thank you, Comptroller Stringer. Borough President Adams.
Thank you so much. This is a personal conversation for me. Growing up in Queens, South Jamaica, Queens, I was bused to a school outside of my community because we felt and we couldn't get the adequate education in the high schools in the area. That's unacceptable. Our schools are segregated. It is hurting not only those students who are in the classroom, it's hurting our future. Diversity is our special tool here in the city of New York. I will immediately open 5 more specialized high schools, 1 in each borough. Look at the top students across the educational spectrum and use different criteria because our children are gifted and talented more than just taking an exam. By having those 5 new schools, you are going to look at cross sections of the gifts and talents that children have. I'll also invest in something that we don't do, far more resources in tutoring and extra education, extended school hours that many of my educators have shared with me. And we must create the best remote learning system on this globe. It is something that's going to be here for a long time, and we need to take advantage of it. And we must be better at students using remote learning and educators using remote learning. Clearly, if we're going to deal with this education, we must speak with people who are closest to the action. That's what I do. Not only do I speak to my significant other, who was a former principal for over 30 years and now train principals and support principals, but also speak to my educators, my leadership team at the schools, parents. I've had countless numbers of roundtables, forum discussions. They showed me how to invest the $165 million I've invested in our schools. This is not professional for me. This is personal for me.
Thank you. This next question comes from one of the publishers in our midst, and it's about a very important issue, a pocketbook issue for many of the outlets who are tuned in today. Our mayor established a regulation that a minimum of 50% of the ad budget for all city agencies be allocated to ethnic and community media. During this health crisis, it has been over 80%. Do you pledge to continue this directive as mayor? General Sutton, you're up first.
What I would do is I would want to first conduct an assessment and see how this policy has been received, how effective it has been, how the communities whom it is intended to reach, what their input is. And based upon community input, based upon objective analytic assessment, as well as engagement with my leadership across the administration, I would certainly be open to continuing it, but I would want to know, are there ways that we could improve it and even better target, for example, the language, the literacy, the translations, the cultural congruency, all of the things that so often can separate individuals from being able to communicate and get the news that they desperately, desperately need. So I absolutely celebrate the intent, and I would just want to make sure we evaluate what the impact has been and figure out how we could even do it better going forward.
Thank you. Comptroller Stringer.
Well, I want to say that I had an opportunity to partner with Borough President Adams on this issue. Remember, Eric, some time ago when Eric made the point that he was hearing about the lack of investment of city dollars with local newspapers. He asked me to take a look at the issue, and we did an investigation that in fact found that the data from DCAS was showing that very few dollars were going to crucial newspapers. And the reason we fought to change that and got the de Blasio administration to do better was because these papers, and that's why we're here today, are critical to making sure that people who speak different languages, come from different cultures, have an opportunity to survive. And in this economic climate, there's no secret that the newspaper industries have been hardest hit, but local papers are dying, and the city should do everything in its power to invest. I've done the data work. I know where the money is. We have to do better. I will ensure that we give the fair share resources to keep our community alive in terms of advertising from city agencies. I've advertised, and we have tried to find people who were victimized by unscrupulous contractors, and we needed to get their prevailing wage money back into the hands of the workers. You know who we turn to? The community-based organizations, the consulates, and the diverse community newspapers and companies that were able, because of this great constituency, were able to help us meet that challenge and give back millions of dollars. I am committed to it. I believe in it, and I'm happy to have played a role in it.
Mr. Borough President.
Yes, thank you. You know, Scott, I would like to believe that that report we collaborated on together really moved the city in a direction to make this happen. I thought that was a great collaboration and partnership. And I agree, yes, not only will I commit to where we are now, but I assembled together during the heat of COVID, a group of men and women that advocate on behalf of our immigrant population. And we talked about how we approach the dissemination of information in the city. This is not an English speaking city, and we need to stop acting like that. All of the press conferences and debriefings by the governor, by the president, the mayor, they were all in English. We did not allow the information to get down to this diverse city we're in. In Brooklyn alone, 47% of Brooklynites speak a language other than English at home. That's how we must view our city. And so let's go to another level. Not only will I ensure that we continue these targets, but we need to look into those who have partnerships with our city. They must advertise in our local papers. I know this far too well because I'm in all of my communities, my South Asian, my Caribbean, my Creole speaking, my Russian speaking. That is where many of our problems lie, the improper dissemination of information during the census, during COVID, and during just navigating governmental services. That's why in my 100 Steps Forward plan that I mentioned, I talk about how do we use technology to better communicate with the diverse groups in this city. This is our secret weapon is our diversity. We need to start appreciating the various languages and using the local media as a way of doing so. So I'm 2 thumbs ups on it.
And Commissioner Garcia, what's your take?
Yeah, I'm going to come at it from a slightly different point of view. I am very supportive of using local community media in multiple languages, but because I'm doing you a favor, but because I have found in my role as sanitation commissioner that it was the most effective way to communicate with these communities. And that we were very active in searching out local papers, because in some cases that is the paper people read over, the New York Times or the Daily News or the Post in this city. And if you didn't work with them, you were not going to get the information to those people that you wanted them to have. And so I come at it from a really practical point of view of when you are trying to tell folks a message, and that could be on COVID or other healthcare issues or on financial issues or on other service issues, you've got to get the message to them. That's sort of the PR 101. And so using community and ethnic media is the most effective way to do that. And I would certainly commit to continuing that in my administration.
So the city recorded 97% more shootings and 45% more murders in 2020 than in 2019. So far in 2021, shootings are up 15%, murders 42%. As one of our attendees asks, what are your specific plans for public safety? Comptroller Stringer, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Jared. And by the way, after this call, I have to drop off because I have actually a screening and my fellow candidates know what this is like. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. Look, I'm a kid who grew up in Washington Heights back in the 1970s when there were 2,000 murders a year. My mom would say to my brother and I, when you take the train, sit with the conductor in the conductor car. So all the kids were in the conductor car. I'm happy to say that most kids today don't even know there's a conductor in the conductor car. We've come a long way on crime, but we are seeing an uptick in shootings. I think it's very important that we start organizing to go where the crime, the shootings is happening. It is predictable. We know where it's at. We just need a larger plan to get there. So first, I think the most experienced police officers should go into communities where these shootings are occurring. I think we have to up the conveyance rates in terms of actually getting these criminals caught so we can get them off the streets and get guns off the street. But I also think we have to have a policing plan that recognizes that not every incident in a community requires a badge and a gun. And we do need to invest part of this budget in mental health professionals and guidance counselors, look at the programs throughout the country that's working. You know, we can do both. We can have a safe city, but we can also create a new way of dealing with the criminal justice system. When I was in the state assembly as a young assembly member, I worked with Roger Green and Al Vann, titans in Albany, who would say to Republican senators, don't build prisons, build schools. And these Republicans, all they wanted was a prison in upstate New York. They wanted to take a prison and build an economy around the prison. And we said there's a better way to do that. The prison pipeline is very much alive. And we've got to keep our kids away from this criminal justice system. Part of my policing plan will be to make sure we use the strategy to keep guns off the street and make sure our conveyance rates are enhanced. But we're also going to do it so we don't have any more Breonna Taylors or Eric Garners or George Floyd's who have highlighted the inequality and the social justice challenges we have with the next mayor and the next police commissioner. And I thank all of you for listening to me. I hope to come back soon.
Thank you, Comptroller Stringer, and good luck with your screening. Borough President Adams.
Thank you. A very significant topic for me. Every time a bullet leaves the barrel of a gun and hits a human body, the physical pathway may stop, but the emotional trauma continues to rip apart the anatomy of the communities and families for generations to come. We need to be very specific and clear of dealing with gun violence. Gun violence hurts us in many ways. Not only does it take a life or maim a life on an individual, but it also destroys our tourism, our multi-billion-dollar industry. Every time there's a report of violence, you are hurting the recovery effort of our city, and which we should be clear of that. The prerequisite to prosperity is public safety. I would immediately reinstitute the anti-crime unit and turn it into an anti-gun unit, make sure we have the best experienced officers who are not only good at fighting crime, but have the right training to be in a unit that's a plainclothes unit. That is crucial. Second, we will utilize precision policing. We know the bad guys, we know the shooters, we know who are carrying guns, and we immediately identify them and have our precision policing to go after them. Third, we put in place a tri-state task force that is going to conclude all of my local cities and municipalities around New York City. We have to stop the flow of guns on our streets. That is one of the major problems we're having. The southern states and other states, and even parts of New York State, is a major issue when it gets to guns here in our city. And lastly, we have to change the ecosystem of public safety. We can't be just reactionary. We have to be proactive in doing things that prevent people from having crime or going to a life of crime in the first place. We have failed in that area. I'm going to become a more proactive approach to public safety and change the ecosystem of it.
Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you. It is extraordinarily concerning to see crime ticking up in this city. I too grew up in the 80s. I remember you weren't supposed to take the subway after 8 o'clock at night. It was just not done. You knew at least 5 car service numbers in your head if you were ever out after dark because it wasn't safe. It has been an extraordinary renaissance to have a safe city. It is the underpinning for why our economy bloomed. My approach to policing is that we need to change the culture. They need to be guardians for all of their communities. And that means more intensive training, more implicit bias training, and not just as a module in the police academy, but part of their everyday life. We need to increase the age of police officers from 21 to 25. We need to have new police officers live in the city. And I know that will require state legislation, but I think it's the right thing to do. And we need to hold police officers rigidly accountable for performing their jobs. The NYPD collects an extraordinary amount of data and uses an extraordinary amount of technology. Being able to predict where shootings are is something that they can drive in and dig in and find out, but it needs to be in coordination with the communities. Better relationships with their communities means that they'll know before things happen that there is a problem with gangs in one NYCHA development against another NYCHA development. And that is often the case where there is conflict. Also, they promote it on social media. They tell what they're going to do on social media, and we need to be tracking that. But more, as mayor, I will hold the police commissioner accountable for the crime rates in neighborhoods, but also in ensuring that there is a respect and dignity for all New Yorkers.
Thank you. General Sutton.
Absolutely. Thank you. This whole issue of policing and public safety, it really does boil down to relationships between cops and community members. Both of them need each other. And yet we've seen this last year, and particularly starting last summer after George Floyd's murder, we saw what happened not only here, but across the country. I think that what we saw happen last summer was really in large part related to a lack of leadership. It wasn't clear, and it hasn't been clear to NYPD officers, patrol officers on the beat out there with those crowds. It hasn't been clear what the mayor, what City Hall is expecting from them. There's a fear factor that has taken place. Certainly, accountability is critical, but overarching accountability has to stay with the mayor and with the commissioner. I did not support defunding the police, and I do not support it. I do support a 3R strategy, which I've got my public safety plan up on my website, loreeformayor.nyc, that involves both reimagining what law enforcement can and should be in a city like New York, expanding it, as I mentioned it earlier, in terms of a coordination council and really being able to develop the analytics that will help us spot the trends, determine the patterns, and divert the resources, but then also to reinvest in both communities as well as in police officers, their training, transforming the culture, best practices from around the country, and also looking at those areas in our city that have been very successful, the precision policing that Eric talked about. People forget that no one thought that you could stop or reduce stop and frisk by 90% and still bring crime down. NYPD, working in conjunction with communities and leaders throughout the city, did that. But we are now in a position where, particularly in a time of crisis and conflict, fear has a way of taking root. The polarization, the demonization that has affected our political process, it has also affected policing. And I think that the next mayor is going to have to recognize that, going to need to draw lines and communicate that respect is a two-way street. It will be very clear to NYPD what the expectations are from my administration. I will work carefully, closely with the commissioner and re-interview every senior leader from 4 to 1 stars before I accept them to work in my administration. It is so critical to get this right. Our prosperity, our future really depends upon getting this right. Thank you.
So we're coming, sadly, close to the end of our time. I want to squeeze in some of these questions. So if candidates could limit their answers to about a minute to these, I know that's not very much time for a lot of policy detail, but it'll let us cover more territory. This also related to criminal justice, the $8.7 billion borough jails plan. If you're elected mayor, would you keep that on track? Would you change any aspect of it? Let's start with you, General Sutton.
Yeah, with crisis comes opportunity. I've been tracking this issue very, very carefully over the last several years. I've read the report and the group that led by the judge who wrote out the recommendations for closing Rikers. And I think that, you know, with where we are right now, with this crisis, there does come an opportunity for us to relook the Rikers plan. I can't find anyone anywhere who would tell me that a high-rise jail complex is a best practice for criminal justice. I'm working right now with a retired corrections officer who is advising me on putting together an alternative way forward with respect to Rikers, one which would launch a global competition where we could take away the issues. I mean, there's the community pushback. They don't want high-rise prisons or jails in the respective boroughs, and it's not a best practice anyway. But further, there are things that were not factored into the analysis that absolutely have to be: the parking, the fleet maintenance, the cost of shutting down the bakery and buying bread and other items individually in the boroughs. There's a whole host of issues there. And I think that a global competition to really reimagine what we could do to transform our criminal legal system, to put the justice back in it, to be able to build out the secure diversion programs, to make sure that rehabilitation is the name of the game from the very beginning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you. And I do support the borough-based jails. I've lived my entire life with Brooklyn House of Detention in downtown Brooklyn. Probably not as high as contemplated, but still a high-rise jail. We know that having a little bit more sunshine on what happens in our jails would be very good for it, and integrating them into close proximity to the courthouses will make us more efficient. It is a once in a lifetime opportunity, but I am hopeful that we can actually make them smaller as we bring the jail population down and do more diversion like the Red Hook courts. We don't want anyone to be spending a night in jail who doesn't have to. And we want to just make sure that it is for those who are considered unlikely to return to court. But I think it is an unbelievable opportunity for us to rethink about how we move forward on our criminal justice system. So I do support the borough-based jails. And in Brooklyn, it certainly did not hurt property values around that particular facility.
Mr. Borough President.
Thank you. Yes, I support. We need to stay on track in closing Rikers. It is a blemish on us all, and it's imperative that we move in the right direction. But also, I think it's imperative that we listen to those who are real creative thinkers. I had an amazing conversation yesterday in one of my advisory meetings and briefings that I have with Greg Berman, who was part of the Red Hook Court Initiative. He was the creator of SOS and so many other programs to prevent crime. Our focus must move from the place of being downstream to pull people out of the river. We must go upstream and prevent them from falling in the first place. That is my focus. We want to decrease the prison population, the jail population. We can do it by taking some simple measures, simple as dyslexia screening in all of our schools, only $2,000 per school, and that could prevent potentially 30% of our jail population. We must do a better job and showing the pathway to education and not incarceration.
Commissioner Garcia, are there any aspects of city government, city services that you think could be privatized and rendered more efficiently by privatization?
I am not in favor of privatization of any new city services, but I would say we actually have privatized a lot of city services. Most of our social services are delivered by nonprofits, whether or not that's running homeless shelters or after school or early childcare. And I think they do a very effective job at getting that work done. So I am for the city running as it is. I don't foresee privatizing city services.
General Sutton?
Yeah, I think it's amazing in New York, the level of community-based organizations who work in tandem with the city. I don't foresee additional privatization at a large scale. I do, however, see the opportunity for public-private partnerships. And I think going forward, the city's going to have to spend less money and have to rely more on public-private partnerships, leveraging private financing as well as private expertise. But in terms of large scale privatization of existing city services, I think we have a pretty good balance right now, but the next stage is going to be a very, very trying one. And we've got to do it together in partnership.
Borough President Adams.
I don't believe in privatizing city services. The goal of city services is not profit, but people. But what we could do a better job at is a proper coordination of our amazing nonprofits that are really filling the gap. But the lack of coordination with city services and our nonprofits, I talk about it in my plan of 100 Step Forwards on how do we better align those services. And then better partnerships. There are a large number of private industries that are willing to come in, provide their expertise for free. We should be tapping into Google and other entities on how do we better use the technology we have in our schools, in our communities. How do we have free consultation on how to run our agencies more efficiently. And so no private more
so speaking of efficiently, we're going to try to squeeze in one more, and we're going to have Ms. Garcia go first because I know she has a hard out at 3. Capital projects in the city, they move, it seems, relatively slowly. Do you have a way to make them move faster if and when you're elected mayor?
Oh, yes. I've been on the, what should you say, the receiving end of the bureaucracy of trying to move a capital project. The overwhelming amount of oversight that is not necessary. We can audit on the back end. We don't need to have Mox and OMB and the Comptroller and everyone else who makes it take literally 9 to 12 months to procure anything. I would ensure that that was wiped out, whether or not we have to do it through legislation or we have to do it through executive order. That'd be the first piece. The second piece, we need to have incentives in our capital contracts for speed, because speed is money in capital construction. I've seen it be very effective on the Tunnel 3 water work, where they came in under budget and on time because of the incentives in that program. We know what works, and we tend to just go through this process where it's so painful to get anything open, and a 12-year construction timeframe isn't insane. It should be insane. When I'm mayor, I know where all of the real challenging places are in the bureaucracy and how to get rid of them. But I'm going to have to jump, folks, because I had a hard stop at 3. I really appreciate being on with my fellow candidates as well as your entire community. Thank you, Jarrett, for your fine moderation, and have a lovely rest of your afternoon, folks.
Thank you, Commissioner Garcia. Good luck. Borough President Adams, capital
yes,
projects.
Yes, I strongly believe we could do a better job, and also allow some of our local entities like Friends of Parks. They have been able to move through capital projects at a rate that is far faster than what we're seeing our city agencies are doing. It makes no sense how much money it costs to build a bathroom on Parks ground, and then you'll go to somewhere like the Prospect Park Alliance, and they're able to do it half the time, half the cost. So yes, we can do a better job. Too much bureaucracy, as I talk about in my 100 Step Forward proposals, that we need to centralize the actual documentation of it. There's no reason each agency we go to, we do a duplication in forms, a duplication in process. Several agencies have to review the same material over and over again. That is just not how we should run an efficient city. Those are the inefficiencies that are creating the inequities that I talk about.
And General Sutton.
Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to capital projects, the timelines are so long and so often over budget and under imagined. And so I agree with what's been said about streamlining the bureaucracy, keeping in mind though that part of the bureaucracy, part of the steps have come about as safeguards to make sure that there's no corruption or siphoning of funds or betrayal of the public interest. But I think it's really a matter of demonstrating faith workers that government is capable of doing really big things and to do things on time and on budget. And so as mayor, I would certainly bring in all of the best practices from wherever they may be found, either in the city, in the state, around the country, around the world. But I think we have a lot of work to do, and we have to stop on a smaller level the kinds of stories that come out when you see, whether it's like Eric said, the restroom that was was built in twice the time across the street from the Alliance, or just recently the story about the broadband and how the shelters were able to improvise and get it going for a fraction of the cost of what the city was, and in a fraction of the time. We've got to get better and up our game in terms of efficiency and effectiveness. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, General Sutton. Thank you, Borough President Adams, and to our two departed candidates, Commissioner Garcia and Comptroller Stringer. Thanks also to the folks from CCM for putting this on, Graciela, Jahangir, Luciana, and Jennifer. Thank you most of all to all the attendees who chimed in, especially all those who provided such excellent questions. I'm sorry we only got to a handful of them. The good news is this is the first of 5 forums by CCM, and we are 5 months from the primary, so plenty of time to get more of those questions answered. I'll put in a plug for citylimits.org and our coverage of this race. And we are interested in partnering with you in the ethnic and community media in covering it. So if you have stories about local races, issues that are important to you and want to collaborate, I just put my email address in the chat. Please drop me a line. I hope everyone has a good rest of the afternoon. Stay healthy and stay hopeful. Take care.
Thanks so much, Jarrett. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.